Oh, that's James Wolfe. He was a British general who got killed during the French and Indian War. Okay. Dear Tim and Moby, please tell me about the French and Indian War. From Bobby. The French and Indian War was a conflict between France and Great Britain over territory in North America. It lasted from 1754 to 1763. Actually, American Indian nations fought on both sides, but we'll get to that in a minute. By the middle of the 18th century, the 13 British colonies were thriving. The land to the west was controlled by France, and they'd claimed most of Canada too. Most of New France was relatively unsettled by the French. Fewer than 100,000 colonists lived there, and their economy revolved around trade with native peoples. Well, the borders between the French and the British territories were sort of vague. A lot of land had been claimed by both countries, including the Ohio River Valley. Sparks started flying when British fur traders moved into the region. The French wanted to control all the trade in what they considered their territory. And the British were undercutting their prices, offering the same goods at a lower cost. So the French warned their native trading partners to stop dealing with the British and began building military forts to keep the English out, including Fort Duquesne, built in 1754 at the intersection of three key rivers to cut off British expansion. That spurred the governor of Virginia to send in soldiers to kick out the French. They were led by a young colonel named George Washington. Washington and his men ambushed French forces at the Battle of Jumonville Glen, but they were eventually forced to surrender and head back to Virginia. The battle turned a territorial dispute into an open conflict. After this, the leaders of France and Britain started sending troops and supplies to North America. And that's how the French and Indian War began. Well, at the start, most native nations sided with France. The French tended to treat them with more dignity and respect. They viewed the nations as trading partners, not enemies. And unlike Britain, France didn't build farms and towns on native land. The Brits had some native allies, the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful six-nation alliance to the east. Still, the British weren't very good at fighting on the uneven terrain and were constantly forced into retreat. But by 1758, things began to change. Back in England, a politician named William Pitt took over the planning for the war. He sent thousands of additional soldiers to capture the biggest French settlements in Canada. He increased popular support for the war in Great Britain and the American colonies. And he attacked French territories around the world, expanding the conflict into Europe and Asia. Yep, the French and British were fighting battles as far away as India, but the major action was still based in North America. The British Navy blockaded the Atlantic coast, preventing French ships from getting through. Soon, France couldn't reinforce its armies with new soldiers or supplies. Over the next 2 years, the British won victory after victory. The biggest came in 1759, when General James Wolfe captured the Canadian city of Quebec. Right, that's the scene from the painting. The next year, the British took Montreal, and the French surrendered for good. 3 years later, the two sides signed the Treaty of Paris. France had to give up virtually all of its North American territory. Britain took control of all land east of the Mississippi, and all of Canada too. But that's not the end of the story. The war had left Britain deep in debt, so they started taxing the American colonists to pay it off. With no representation in England's government, the colonists weren't too thrilled about these new taxes. In fact, the issue sparked a revolution. Right, that's the one. Hey, speaking of which, can you change this painting back? I think we should go. Like, now.